Thank you all for coming. I want to set some context for this session. If you are in the session for navigating the Great Resignation, right? You're in the right session. We're all here. So we're going to have a discussion today and not just talk at you, but give a little insight, a little information, and make sure that we include and engage you because we want to hear your thoughts as well and kind of what's going on in your space. So what we do know for sure, and I got my trusty handheld in here too as well, working through this, but the description for this session is 48 million people quit their jobs in 2021. True fact, right? And a recent survey found that 40% of employees are thinking about leaving their jobs in the next 6 months. As managers and business owners, how do we address the wants and needs of employees? What can be done to support teams when vacancies arise? What retention strategies are not only possible, but sustainable for long term? Whether you supervise one person or oversee the work of hundreds, join us in this session. So we've got some panelists here today for you. I'm going to moderate this session. I'm Keisha Williams, Assistant Vice President of Learning and Organization Development here at Duke University and the health system, and we service the 43,000. So very in tune to what's going on today. And I've got some great people here that will help us in this conversation, and I want to introduce them. I've got bios here, and I'm going to start to my immediate left. It's Piper Mitchell. Piper is one of Duke's very own here in HR. Piper has covered over 14 years of professional experience as a practicing attorney and high-level administrator, primarily in the higher education and sports entertainment sectors. In November of 2021, Ms. Mitchell became Director of Human Resources, Staff and Labor Relations at her alma mater, Duke University. She is a proud member of the class of 2005. In this capacity, Ms. Mitchell provides support, advice, and guidance to business units and leaders within the Duke enterprise on matters such as talent acquisition and retention, employee relations, employee discipline, and many other things. She also manages complex investigations, and I know, Piper, you do complex, end-to-end spearheads cultures and climate surveys, and serves as the university's lead administrator on all matters related to the 5 university unions, among other things. Prior to joining, she was Assistant University Legal Counsel for North Carolina Central University. Piper's degrees are BA in Public Policy Studies from Duke University, a JD from Howard University, MPS Sports Industry Management, Georgetown University in 2014. So, Piper, thank you for being with us today. And also, we have, navigating the screen, to my immediate left, all right. We have Halli. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. Halli. She's a partner in the Atlanta office of Troutman, Pepper, and an alumni, 50 million law firm. Halli is a trial attorney with specialized practice in product liability, defense, and serious personal injury cases involving pharmaceuticals and medical devices. She has extensive experience managing all aspects of the mass tort litigation and has represented clinical laboratories in claims of misdiagnosis and neglect screening. Her past trial experience involves automotive design and manufacturing issues, and she has represented large oil and gas companies in serious personal injury and premise liability cases. Halli is nationally recognized for her work by the Legal 500 and Best Lawyers in America. She graduated from Duke University in 1987 before pursuing her law degree from Emory University School of Law and graduating in 1990. And our last but not least, our panelists. We have Laurie Bevier. She is a Chief Talent Officer for GE. Laurie is responsible for developing the company's global talent pipeline. from its talent acquisition strategy and early career development programs through to executive talent management. She also leads GE's performance management framework and diversity of inclusive strategy. Prior to her current role, Laurie served as head of HR for GE Corporate, responsible for developing the company's corporate HR strategy, global talent pipeline, functional learning, and leadership development program. With more than 25 years of experience at GE, Laurie has held a variety of HR leadership roles across most of GE's business units. Her diversity of experience ranges from HR, business partnership roles, to leading learning and development, executive development, global leadership, program design, and global talent management. Laurie holds a bachelor's degree in public policy studies from Duke University and a master's degree in management from Kellogg School of Northwestern University. She and her husband have 2 children and 2 dogs and live in Boston. So thank you for being with us today. And I know, Laurie, let's start with you. You have some contextual information you want to share as well.
So when Keisha and I started to talk about the topic, we thought we would ground it in a little bit of data. And given my role, we have sort of some external research partners. And so I reached out to my friends and said, what do you have? And so what I wanted to do is just help frame it. There was a little bit in the opening, but sort of how bad is it? And first I thought it was really funny with it. You hear the Great Resignation, but then you hear fatal attrition as another way that they talk about that was from our friends at Korn Ferry, and the big quit, right? So those are some ways, and really seeing, and we'll, as we said, we'll do like an engagement, sort of getting you guys all involved, because I think we all see this very differently. Because when you look at turnover rates, really starting in 2021, it was people were seeing in the double digits and up in the 20 and 25% range, varying very much by industry and type of role. And then a Korn Ferry study found that by 2030, so it's not that far from now, the global human talent shortage will be more than 85 million people, and that's the population of Germany, just to give it some context, and left unchecked could be worth 8.5 trillion in unrealized revenue, right? So this is a bottom line issue. And then thinking about, our own organizations, it was a Gartner study that said 55% of our employees, of anyone's employees, are actively looking for a job. So that's over half your population. And 46% feel less connected to their employer. And so that leading to some of this. So we just thought we'd, sort of ground us in, yes, it is bad. and so what Keisha will lead us to is sort of why is this happening and what's the impact and what are we doing about it in our respective organizations. So that, anyway, Keisha, back to you, just some grounding of
Absolutely.
how bad
Thank
it
you
is.
for that. So we do know the gravity of it, and that's why you all are here to have this conversation. We do know the wisdom's in the room too as well. So let's just start by talking a little bit about your prospective industries, where you sit. How are you feeling? How are you feeling the Great Resignation? Meaning, how is it impacting? So talk a little bit about your space, meaning your industry, and how do you feel the Great Resignation within your industry, Halli? Mm-hmm.
Well, I will talk about it from the perspective of big law, is what I do, and I've done all my career. I've been at a couple law firms, but I am now, in the management of one of the sections of our law firm, and so pretty attuned to what's happening. With the and from my perspective as associates in law firms, so it's the younger people this is affecting. I think there's actually 2 different pieces of it. There's sort of junior lawyers who are making decisions, and then there's sort of senior people, even people like me. And what we're seeing is in line with those numbers. We were having in the 21 and 22. 20+% turnover of our associates, and what was happening that I think was happening that we could do the work anywhere, right? So it's all about the change from the being in the office to being mobile. And I think that is what has changed the nature of what was happening in the law firms. So for example, New York law firms who used to recruit, and that's sort of the peak of the big law, they were calling lawyers in Atlanta and in Louisville and in St. Louis, and they were saying, you can work for us, be paid like a New York lawyer, but be in any of those places. And so associates were just jumping at that. I think they weren't really understanding sort of the long-term impacts of that, but that's what they were doing. And so that was really happening significantly in 21, and it started to slow down in 22. And so I think we're not seeing the same change today as we were seeing a year and a half ago. But the core principle of what was the cause of this remains, and that is this dissatisfaction thing of sort of recognize that I'm dissatisfied with my present situation. And I was talking to a woman who does legal recruiting, a friend of mine who had been at my original law firm and is now a legal recruiter, and she told me something which I thought was really interesting, is that the number one question when you're looking for a legal recruiter for the next job used to be compensation, which is not totally surprising. Now it's number 3. And the first question is, how flexible is this present job going to be? So can I do it from my pajamas in my bedroom? The second question I think is the one we also talk about, which is, I'm going to use the word mentoring, but it's sort of interpersonal relationships within the workplace. What are they doing to support me? What is all that about? And then comp. And I think that frames the flexibility and the desire for something more out of the legal experience interpersonally have sort of overtaken the goal of making money. And so that's the switch that we've seen, which COVID induced, leveling off. But that's kind of the nature of, I think, what we see in the legal big law world right now.
Thank you. Piper, would you share?
So I have. Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. I have a very different perspective just because, as Keisha mentioned, I work at Duke. So we have a 43,000 employee enterprise. There's a medical enterprise with, your primary cares in the various and sundry cities around in Durham and Wake County and even Carrboro and other places. We have 3 major hospitals, and then we have the university, right? So we're feeling it differently in different ways. In the medical sector, we're hit hard because those were our frontline workers. Those were our responders who, when every other industry was working from home and trying to figure it out, they were bombarded. They never stopped. They're tired. They're burnout. They're overwrought. They've watched people die in the hundreds and thousands, right? And that takes its own toll, no matter how strong or how much you think you can handle. No one was ready for what COVID did, particularly those in the medical sector. So we're always, in my mind, several steps behind and always looking for employees, right? Because some of them didn't make it. They were exposed, and unfortunately, they did not survive. Some of them got very sick. Some of them said, forget this, I'm going to a different industry. I just can't. And because of that, I think all medical systems are suffering, right? They're hemorrhaging. You can see how it's happening with this new increase in unionization of nurses and medical professionals. And so that's one side. And we can talk about how we're trying to navigate that, but it is difficult. Then you have kind of the other side where you have the higher ed side. And in my mind, higher ed has really 2 sides: the actual educational component where we're learning and we're teaching and we're instructing, but also the back office people that make the institution itself run. And so what COVID taught us, in my opinion, and where I sit, is that there is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And it used to be that way, right? Everybody would come to work. You would be there from 8 to 5, 9 to 5. If you were a higher level executive, you might stay till 6 or 7. You could go home. You would check your Palm Pilot. I'm dating myself, BlackBerry or smartphone and laptop. And, it wasn't this. It was starting to go in the push of 24/7 employment, but you still had a little bit of a break. We all knew what work meant. We all knew what it looked like. Then COVID hit, and it upended everything. So what is the new normal? Who knows? It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Does everybody in HR need to be at the office 5 days a week from 9 to 5? Not necessarily. I'm a person who works well from home generally, always have. I've studied well from home. I'm more productive at home. But when Halli talks about mentoring, I realize that if I'm not in the office, somebody who works for me may not have certain exposures to me, right? They may not be in the right place where I say, hey, come to a meeting and just sit and observe. So are they learning? Am I doing them a disservice? So what we do in HR and when we're trying to figure out every day is, what is the approach? And I think the best approach, while not always realistic, is one, realizing that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but two, and more importantly, knowing your employees and knowing what they want. Some want mentorship. Some want the flexibility to come in one day a week and spend the rest of the day in dressy tops and yoga pants. Some want an opportunity to be paid, right? And so where is that person in their life? What are their needs? You have to factor in family needs, children, elderly parents. What is their living situation? We've watched the cost of living skyrocket in North Carolina over the last 2 years. Are they able to spend the money on gas that is happening and still pay their mortgage? There are lots of things that we need to consider. And so every day we try to figure out how to meet our employees where they are, so that we can retain them and allow them to grow, allow them to be in a space where they like where they work. And that's hard, and we're not always accomplishing that.
Thanks, Piper. Laurie?
So I have worked for GE for my entire career, which is why I thought we definitely needed a panel. We definitely need you guys, because I have one perspective from one company, and it's 175,000 employees worldwide. We're in 3 very different businesses. Our healthcare business, we just actually spun that business, but healthcare, aviation, and the energy space, all very different. And so during, we've always had, again, it varies, but it was probably, 5 or 6% people, they come to GE in our entry-level programs, like myself, and stay their entire career. So my 30 years is not, this is very typical in GE. And so during the pandemic, we did see, my team sort of looked at attrition every single week, and then we dropped off to monthly. It was rising, but we were 5 or 6% to maybe we got up to 8 to 10% attrition. But that was, ground shaking for us in terms of what we had been looking at. So we dissected it in ways that had to say, to the one, you can't do the one size fits all. Really look at. We looked at different levels. We looked at different functions, and in even sort of in our big businesses, there's lots of different businesses within, sort of P&Ls within, and so you have to really sort of dig into to see what's happening. And what we saw was so you have a global pandemic coming around for sure, but then if you look at the business situation, right? If they're doing any sorts of major transformation or restructuring or selling off a business, you saw attrition just, it's just the uneasiness on top of a global pandemic. And so we definitely saw that. We also looked at the attrition data with our employee engagement survey. And you can look at that by manager, and where you have sort of confidence in leadership, you see a lot lower, sort of attrition than you do in like a very low engagement score with certain leaders. So we could, dissect all of this information and actually sort of pinpoint where we needed to do the work. And I'd say in some cases you do the work and you just pay, right? I mean, there is just sometimes like a cybersecurity. It is a war out there for, digital technology talent in this space. And you just pay or, retain or, up salaries or whatever you have to do. But I in my mind, it's a lot more than that. Like, that's very selective in what our data was telling us. More, it's sort of where Halli was going. If you look at those top 2, it is about, what is my career? And if I stay, what does that look like? It's a lot easier to leave than it is to stay. And it's also looking at how much my manager engages, me in this, like, my little micro culture of my team, and how do I feel about that, as I said, like the culture of our team, and how sticky is that in terms of the way I feel about it. So anyway, those are some of the things that we're looking at GE.
Yeah, I think that you hit something. there's not just the pandemic. I think that there is actually a generational shift that's overlaying this. That the next generation has different priorities than we did. I mean, there was a time in law firms, you just went there and you gave your right arm and you worked. You never thought about it. You just did what you were supposed to do, and then you have this years go by, and then you make partner in a law firm, and there was that model, and nobody was thinking about how do I feel about being in this environment, and what are the other options, and it just wasn't a thing. You went to law school and you paid your dues and you did it. And this generation, and I have two daughters, one of whom I'm seeing this very much through, despite how much of an old soul she is so focused on what does it feel like in the environment that I'm in? How is my manager treating me? What are the support systems? All these things that didn't even cross my mind. I just said, I'm going to work and I'm going to do what I'm asked to do. So I think that there is this shift generationally, and some of it is, I think, a positive. I mean, there's no question. I mean, the fact that I never thought about how do I feel about this is kind of a sad state of how I was 20 years ago. But I think that we need to figure out how do we bridge this, because it's the perspective. My husband and I are saying, where is this kid coming from? So we're not relating specifically. And the same thing, we have conversations with associates. They're like, well, I can go down the road, and they're letting us stay at home all the time instead of sort of being asked to be in the office 3 days a week. And so people are making really nuanced decisions about employment that were not made before, which I think is a combination of the pandemic and a shift in thinking.
And I think I want to piggyback off that because I'm in this weird space. I'm in the Oregon Trail generation where you kind of exactly where what it was like before cell phones, and you were still you had AOL by the time you were like 10, but you also see the desire of I want to travel. I want to do more. There are certain things that I need. Maybe I don't need to stay for 20 years. I mean, and part of that was what happened with the various recessions, right? Economically, we're not in the same places and spaces our parents were, right? Like, you worked hard, you got promoted, there were more mid-level, mid-manager positions, so there were more steps, and with each step increase, you could get more money. Now, with all the recessions, we cut those mid-layers out, right? And so it's like, there's some question of, well, what is the purpose of staying? Is it the money? Well, that's hard because all these studies are saying you do better if you jump ship, go someplace else for a few months, and come right back to a position in the place that you were at, and you're now making, 50, 60, 70,000 more. And it was like, all I had to do was leave. I like this job, but all I had to do was leave for a couple of months, and now they know I'm good and I'm back. So it is generational. And the question is, how do you bridge that gap? And it's going to be more difficult because there are more baby boomers working longer, again, because of the financial distress that has happened in the economy. So as baby boomers roll out, it is going to probably be more precipitous than it was in the past, where it was more of a rolling, we're retiring in kind of ebbs and flows. I think a lot of boomers are going to exit, and then we're going to be in a crisis if we don't figure out what we're doing to help Gen Z, or where we're meeting those younger generations, because they are changing the landscape in a very crazy way that we never anticipated seeing from an HR and employment standpoint, because they will walk away. To your point, Halli, like, what is ghosting? Like, I would never accept a job and never show up, but it is a big thing. And as we look at how we're hiring people and what our needs are, we need to think about the generation. But I also want us to think about, how are we treating our hard workers? My friends and I had a quote in law school, and we'd say, why are we always being persecuted for being overachievers? We put upon people who are very good and who choose to stay extra work. And we need to make sure at the same time that we are keeping those people happy. And maybe, again, not one size fits all. What do they need? Because if they leave, we can literally see how our organizational structure, even on a micro scale, can collapse or be severely damaged. So again, it's what do people need? But this generational thing overlaying COVID is something we have to get a hold on, or as employers, we're going to be in a very big lurch very soon.
So in the what do we do about it categories you guys were talking, I was thinking, one of the areas that we always thought about, we call them people leaders, the cool word for, a manager. And, we always, you would go in your career and you become like, you have a team, right? You're an individual contributor, and then you grow in your career and you have your team. And we didn't really ever tell them what that means or how to be a good people leader and what that means. And so this nuanced approach, right? It's not a one size fits all. What that takes is someone who is that leader, that, people leader of a team, and actually takes the time to know their team. So what motivates them? What does it take to retain them? Whether it's, we were just talking about compensation or a job. And for us, it's been around careers. In order for people to think about staying, they have to see inside, what are my prospects? Because outside, they're getting calls every single day, and they're saying, you can get to this level at this, trajectory, and they're just painting this, this lofty picture. But we don't market ourselves internally. Market in terms of, here's an opportunity, or what about, and here's a path, and think about, what we'd like to do that, right? And that takes a really good people leader who A, is going to take the time, B, think it's important, and C, know what are, different career options. And so it's almost like they've got to become internal talent acquisition, have that competency to be able to have these kind of conversations with their team. And so we're trying to A, equip them, B, say, the time you take the time. You're an engineer, and that's great. You got to get the product out, but percentage of your time has got to be being the best people leader of this team. And before, there was never anything in their sort of goals or objectives for the year of I got to be a good people leader. And now we're saying it's important, and then we're measuring it. It's through this engagement survey I was saying, and we look at not we in my job, but that is a key. And if you're a leader and you look at all of your people leader scores on all of these different elements, career being one of them, and you can see how are they doing, right? And then coaching, developing, or moving them out into that. So, anyway, it's just something that we're diving deep in at GE.
Well, I think that's interesting you say that, because I think lawyers historically are terrible managers. So it wasn't part of your job. It was like you write your brief, you do your deal, whatever it is, and it didn't matter. You didn't have to worry about what the people were doing. And so I don't think law firms have adjusted to that dynamic yet. I think that we're talking the talk. I just don't think we're putting it into action, because people don't even know what to do. Because what we do here, when we lose all these people, we do exit interviews, and what we do here is they don't know what their future is. And it's all about not knowing. And in a law firm, it's, are you going to make partner in this law firm? And they feel like there's just not enough transparency, and so they don't know what the future is. So they're going to go someplace else. Many of them, I firmly believe, if someone sat down and really became their advocate or their advisor or their mentor, whatever the right word you are, if they felt connected to somebody, then they're going to be connected to their career at this place. And it just wasn't happening. And I think now we've got the double whammy of not in the office and that issue. So I think about the year that I was really at home. I mean, really almost not in the office at all. You would finish a meeting, a Zoom meeting, and normally, if you were together with an associate, you would have a conversation about, well, this is why I said that, or this is what I would do next, or whatever. And instead, you just finished your call, and there was no dynamic with the associate afterwards. And so I don't know how in the world they're learning how to be lawyers from that set of facts, right? Because there's no guidance. You do the task, and then the Zoom goes off. And so we have this. So how are we going to become better people leaders if we're not interacting in person with the people? And so how do you do that in the context of the main goal of people wanting to have the flexibility of being at home? So the challenge, I know we're not identifying solutions in this conversation. It's just about identifying the problems at this point.
Piper, do you have things to share about? So let's talk a little bit about what are we doing in this space, and how are we moving? And I just to add, all have hinted on the thing around generational differences and how this plays out. And I can tell you here at Duke, some of the things that we have begun to do, courses around educating our managers around their role, their responsibilities, but also we have a course around generational differences, just that, because it's so important in this time of what we want, and not that you cater, but you've got to meet people where they are and understand that and be open. But that's a part of our education here too as well. But I'll let Piper talk about some things that have been implemented or maybe that we're trying to do.
So again, we have lots of different areas, and I call them fiefdoms because each area has its own HR person embedded. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure our HR teams are looking at managers, right? And it's really hard in certain spaces where you're driven by metrics. How many widgets did you make? How many patients have you seen, right? Because you have these managers, again, who are overwrought and probably at a deficit with employees, and they're like, I don't have time to send our 7 employees to one of Keisha's courses where it's a day-long situation. And we're saying, but you need to. You have to find time. We understand that you need to meet these metrics, but as my husband says, you can't have it both ways. You can't see people leaving because they don't feel like they have a great or supportive manager, or because they don't know which way is up, or because we're not trying to cultivate their career so that they can see themselves being here longer than 2 or 3 years, and then be upset when they leave because you haven't invested in them, right? So when we train our managers, and we have various trainings that we do through Keisha's office, when it's guide to management. What does it look like to be a leader? You need to know who you are. Again, not a one-size-all approach fits. I'm from New York. People can talk to me for the most part any kind of way. I have very thick skin, but I also understand I work in the South, and there are some people you have to be a bit more genteel with, right? That's something that when you talk about effective managers need to know themselves. Who are you? What do you need to improve? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Who is your team? Know them. What do they need? Because what person A needs is surely not what person B needs, and be willing to put in the time. If that's a 5-minute phone call after a meeting to debrief, which is actually something that I consciously do now. I pick up the phone because I wasn't doing that with my employee. I pick up the phone after our call and say, what did you think? She's 6 months into the role. Tell me what you thought. Let me tell you why I said this after I hear her perspective. And let me tell you how I think we should go forward, because mentoring and engagement is important. So, it is a difficult space, but we're really trying to train our managers to the best of our ability, particularly people who are new to the enterprise. Here are all the great things that Duke has to offer, but also help us help you. And we're trying to help you by training, but then take that information and go forward. But even from a holistic scale, we used to require employees to be here for 2 years at the institution before they could get tuition remission benefits. We, effective, I think, July 1st, have cut that down to 6 months. If you are here for 6 months, you can take any class you want. We will give you tuition remission for X amount of credits. And I mean, that's huge, and then the last thing I just thought about when we talk about generational differences, I want money. Mentorship is great. I have 2 kids, so it's about money for me, right? Like, I can do the rest, but that's the generation that I'm in. I just turned 40, so that's where I am. But I also have watched some of our HR colleagues be poached by Stanford, because I think, as you mentioned, Halli, Stanford is paying Stanford money for you to live in North Carolina. And while there's probably some long-term implications, every time I hear that, I'm kind of like, Stanford, I won't leave Duke because I love it. But my point is, again, I just harken back to, what do people need? And how do we help managers figure out what their people need? But how do we also help our employees articulate what they need? Engagement surveys. Hopefully we can start to do them before they leave, right? Because we haven't been able to retain them. But what are you looking for, and what are your needs, such that we can keep you, grow you through our talent pipeline, and make sure you're happy as you contribute to the operations of this enterprise?
Yeah, well, I fear that the big law is in for a significant shift because of this, because it was not a piece of what lawyers did, and if we're not going to give the flexibility, and we're not going to mentor the young people, we're not going to have the people who then continue these law firms on the way the model works. So I think we have to have a shift, but lawyers bill by, tenths of an hour. And so every tenth of an hour is not dollars in the door. And so it's the tension over how you spend time on this issue, when at this point we're feeling like we have a lot to spend time on lots of things. I mean, you have to, the pro bono, you want to give back. Actually, the retention of diverse lawyers is so hard that has become the biggest priority for the non-billable time of the law firm, and that's not the same thing as caring about what everybody wants on an individual basis. So I'm coming towards the end of my career. It would be very hard for me to imagine starting it now in the world that I'm in now, because I don't think it looks the same 20 years from now, and especially if we as lawyers and as partners in law firms don't work hard at figuring out how to retain young lawyers, it's just going to be a constant, in and out. I mean, you can get people to come, you can pay them more money, you can, and that's what happened in the law firm world over the last 2 years. The salaries for associates went from, crazy up by 30% increase, something like that. I mean, the amount of money that we were throwing at this money as the solution, and I think we've now learned from what's happening is that money may not be the solution to these folks, and so we've got to find a path to the softer skills that are not innately part of how we worked before. So what are we doing? Frankly, I would say from my perspective, and even understanding, talking to obviously have friends in lots of law firms, they see the same thing, that we're not doing enough, and I think there's going to be some kind. We haven't reached the wake up call fully. We're dealing with the Great Resignation or the shift. I mean, in law firms, it was more of a shift than a people quitting. It was just people going someplace else to try to find a different thing. That has slowed down. So if the law firm's like, okay, let's slow down. We're not losing associates at the same rate. We don't have to do anything. And I think the cycle is going to begin again. So, one of the things that we are focusing on, we started this thing called, Troutman U. It's on my notebook. It's like sort of a university type. So teaching people, really digging down on the training part for associates. I think that was one thing that we have done post COVID, is trying to find a way to show that we are committed to you as a young lawyer, so that you then commit to us. We've got to find a way. The sticky was the word I was going to use. We have to find a way for stickiness.
Can I jump in real quick for Halli too? The one thing because I mentor some law students, the other thing that's happening where law firms are in trouble is that law students are realizing their value to the extent that, I can go work for Duke in HR and they'll like me and maybe pay me just a little bit more, because I can now see something from two ways, right? Like I can see it from the legal liability perspective as well as a people perspective. Or I can go work for a strategic initiatives firm and they'll like me just a little bit more because I bring added value. So you're also having you have a smaller pool for Halli to pick from in terms of talent at law firms, because they're now realizing that there really are so many more pathways to use that legal degree, even if they never pass the bar, to use that legal knowledge and legal education to just flourish into ultimately some CAO, COO, CHRO role, which is really scary for law firms, because the talent, like you said, the pipeline has always been go to law school, come work for a firm, pay your dues as a junior associate, move up mid-level, and then take over the world with lots of good money. That's what we all learned, but the pool is so much smaller now, and that is scary for big law.
So I was just going to add to the conversation that your strategy has to be, you have to go back to what is your employee value proposition for your organization. Because there are some that they only want them for a few years because the skills change so rapidly, like a lot of tech firms. Like their strategy is, I want you for a few years, I'm going to pay you like a retention just for those 3 years, and then you're free to go because I'm going to get the next person in, right? That is a strategy, an employment strategy. And for GE, it has always been the internal promotion, right? So you start on one of these programs, and as I was saying, my 30 years, very common. Now, that's not going to happen anymore, generational pieces, but it's still, the value proposition is internal career mobility. And so we've got to bring that to life as a leadership and a talent and an HR organization. But you need to know what your value prop is before you start spending money on any of this stuff. So we've talked a little bit about, I was going to talk about a different angle in terms of the what we're doing, and it's all about hybrid work. So we've talked about this, the newfound, I can work from home and be productive. And so I was meeting with a group of talent leaders, people in my role and other companies. And there were, say, like 25 of us, and we did this poll with one another to say, what are you all doing? And for the most, I would say like 80-90% have instituted hybrid work, and it's usually 2 to 3 days. And then we had this whole discussion, are you enforcing it, right? Okay, it's fine to say 2 to 3 days, but if no one's coming in the office, you've just lost this whole development strategy around mentoring and teaching people, et cetera. And so we had this discussion around, do you enforce it and do you track it? There were 2 out of these 25 that were actually tracking it. And the reason it was interesting, it wasn't a certain days, it was 80% or 75% in the month, and then they would track who was in the office when, right? You just badge flip in and you'd know who's in the office and how long. And then we all said, so these few that were doing it, what do you do about it? Like, does everyone get their score? Oh, I only hit 70%. I got to up my time in the office. And they said no. So no one is at that level. You guys may work for very different places and have a different kind of experience, but from these 25 talent leaders, only 2 were tracking it and only 1 was actually doing anything about enforcing it. So I think it's people are really worried about, if I do that, do I hit yet another, people leaving because we're enforcing the return to work. So anyway, just another topic in this very minefield of the Great Resignation.
Okay. I want to start our question and answer, so open it up to the audience for our panel. Any questions? Hands just went up, so you've stimulated a lot. So I think we've got some runners to bring mics, and so there's a couple of hands in the back. And if you will, just state your name and your company that you're with, too.
Want to stand up?
Not really, but okay. She asked me if I wanted to stand up. I said no. Naomi Shapiro, I work at Goldman, so that's an investment bank. So for the lawyer, we've mandated back in the office. We have certain functionalities where we're having a harder time getting people in, but for the most part, we're in. And people who have refused to come in are subject to layoffs, when we're laying people off. So there's been more of a message, given. But to your comment on the young people, I guess a couple observations and then one question on the law stuff. The young people switch jobs. The data is 3 times every 5 years. So you're sort of like against a trend on trying to deal with it. They all want feedback all the time. My personal new trick is, before I give feedback, I announce I'm giving feedback, because what I found is if I just give feedback, no one understands it's feedback. I don't understand why, but that is a thing. But if I say, I'm about to give you feedback, this is feedback, then somehow they understand that was feedback. I think that's a generational problem, but that happens. But like on the law front, it seems like the law firms are just letting people come in, 1 or 2 days a week, because the law firms realized they were more profitable, not making the lawyers come in. Are you giving like an extra half hour after you do a brief to give feedback or explain all your rationale for everything? Or, it seems like that's the only way to train people. And by the way, last observation, our COVID class was weak. It was hard to train them. No one was in. So while they were like coming in, if they weren't in with senior people, they weren't able to learn from senior people. So what responsibility do we have as senior people to make sure we're in and training these people that need feedback every 5 minutes?
There's no question that feedback issue is a big difference, right? And I love the word you use, because I'm on the associate review committee, and I have talked to partners like, how did they not understand that I was telling them X, something negative, and they didn't announce that it was feedback? So I guess that was part of it. We are so afraid as law firms to say you have to be in the office. We have please come 3 days a week is our message, and it is mostly partners who are coming 3 days a week because that's what they knew and that's what they want to do. So and because if you say it, then you've taken away the flexibility, the number one goal of young people, and they'll go someplace else. And so we are not doing that. So we're not having the mentoring opportunities. I have generally sort of that's been important to me all my career. I can actually remember a review I had at one point where my law firm told me that I was spending too much time doing that.
Doing what?
Mentoring.
Oh, mentoring.
Yeah, so that was, at one point, it was sort of a negative in the world of law firms. But I think that we have to figure out a way to spend the extra time. But I do not foresee big law telling anybody they have to be in the office. I think the new normal is going to be, please do, but not you have to.
So I heard, and it'd be interesting if this is, at Goldman, you know this to be true, that the HR leaders of the big banks in New York got together and said, let's all do this. Because if they do it together, then there's nowhere else to go, right? And so I live in Boston. What's that?
I don't know if they got together, but largely all the investment banks are back.
Yeah, no. I know they all got together, and I know they had this conversation, but I don't know if it was this. It's like collusion, right? Like if we all do this, right? Well, so the Boston sort of professional services. I don't know if it's law firms. It's more like they did the same thing to say, if we all require this, there's nowhere else to go. Anyway, fascinating to see that it's safety in numbers.
Hi, Sarah Abrams. I'm an executive at Bowhead Specialty Underwriters. So we're actually an insurance company who underwrite financial lines, including Goldman. We also provide nonprofit for Duke. And it's really interesting because I'm a recovering lawyer, as is my friend Erica, who works for Duke. And part of having kind of that experience and knowledge base, we've done work with Troutman, is providing the feedback to our law firm partners. I'd be curious, and this is where I'm leading with my question, I don't think it's just generational. I think there's also a shift in more women that are coming up. They're going to universities, they're going into professional degrees, and there's more of them in the workforce. So I think we're not just law firms, but all employers, including myself as a Oregon Trail-ish, a generational student of kind of what the labor force looks like, because I evaluate risk for a living. I have to look at what the up-and-comers are. I tell my law firm partners, I want to see project-based work. I'm done with these hourly rates because you decide to pay associates so much more, trickling down those costs to me as an underwriter for my insureds. It's not acceptable. Also, if you want to retain that really strong female talent that's coming up, I want to see what you're doing so that it's not like my whole life is incremental hours. And what are you doing? And be in the office. I think there's a lack of quality of work for individuals, particularly lawyers, because it's an apprenticeship role, that haven't been in the office. And I tell my firm partners that, and I'm happy to tell any associate that during our lunches or during like events that we are at.
So you think you've seen a drop off in the quality of
Yes,
work?
100%. In fact, I tell that to the firms that are not requiring days in the office, and that includes big law. I have, because I have to review the bills and I review the quality of work product that comes across and those that report up to me. So right now I'm at a company, we've been developing over the past couple of years. We're an underwriter. I've been in this business for a while. I review the bills and I review the work product that comes across my desk. I mean, granted, now I have folks that work for me that do that. I definitely saw an impact in the ones that were not in the office, certainly that were at home, to your point, because they're not having those conversations after a client call to talk about, these were the legal issues that we talked about. This is what we saw. This is how we develop. So I'd be curious about your thoughts if you're noticing that in the HR role, because I also underwrite EPL, so I know what that's looking like. And also with GE, that was a very interesting observation because, again, I came from a law firm and I'm in insurance and finance. We tend to try to keep people in that role like GE has and keep them in-house at a company, but having those like 2-year turnovers like tech, I think that's interesting as well. Like how do you kind of pivot in the retention space? So it was very long-winded, but I'm sorry. I'd love to hear all your thoughts. This was excellent. Thank you.
So I probably have an unconventional thought process on this, and I might get in trouble for it. I think we have a serious issue with bad managers, right? Like yes, there are people that need to be in the office, but I think COVID also exposed poor managers. I also think the next thing that's happening is in a lot of spaces, we're just hiring bodies. And what that breeds, because we're so short-staffed. And so what we're doing is we're hiring bodies who are ill-equipped to do the jobs that they need to do. And so I think that's probably a twofold problem, right? Yes, for big law, I do think there is much value in being in the office. But like I said, I had to intentionally call my senior HR consultant and say, let's debrief. Particularly if, we're not in back-to-back meetings or we get off of Zoom with 5 or 10 minutes early, because that is important. She can't grow and she can't take over for me if I don't give her that. But I also am an intentional manager. And I think that so many of our managers are lazy. I think that so many of our managers have not been equipped or built up or given the tools to be good leaders. Absolutely. I don't think some of them are interested in being better. I've met more entitled people in my life over the past couple of years than I would like to, but there's always room for growth. And if you're the smartest person in your room, you need to get out of that room, because there are always opportunities to learn and you need to be open to that. And so I have seen, yes, over the course of my career, particularly since I was at 2 places during kind of COVID era, there is an issue with quality of work and with the work product that's produced. But I also think the overachievers help the poor managers, because if Piper's not going to do it, we'll just give it to Keisha. So Piper's still getting paid, but now Keisha's got her load plus Piper's, and now she's burnt out. So again, now Keisha's leaving because I have put upon Keisha. So it's just this really bad cycle where everything needs improvement, from the mentoring to those who are doing the mentoring. But yes, definitely an issue with quality of work, and I would say quality of lots of employees on management and lower levels.
And let me just, because Piper's speaking to a point, yes, management. When we went into COVID, now remember, because with Duke, brick and mortar, people are face to face, we flipped everything, and of course with the health system, you still have jobs that have to be here, of course, but people were working at home. I had managers calling me, how do I know what they're doing? How do I know even when they were in person, how did you know what they were doing, right? So really that thought process and that change, because the thought of, okay, because I see Keisha typing in her office, she's doing what they weren't doing anything then either. So now you really need to manage. So the engagement piece, and the managers that don't want to talk, don't want to call, because they're just like, I just want to do my role and you do yours. But you've got to engage them in differently and teach them and train them and build them and make sure you have a team that's focused around what clearly is the objective. What clearly is my output? What are you requiring me to do? Because we're really trying to do a better job of making sure our managers are equipped around holding people accountable. What's the accountability?
Back here.
Hey, thank you. Carmen Shaw, Atrium Health and Charlotte Health Executive there. I can talk about this all day long. And Piper, I certainly share the same sentiments. I would say everything you all have been saying is very spot on, and there's so many external factors, I think, that come into play. But I'll tell you, one of the common denominators, I do a lot of coaching with emerging leaders, a lot of coaching with people who just reach out and say, hey, Carmen, I'm not feeling this. And I'll tell you, the common denominator is that we as health leaders, wherever we are, we're not doing a great job of connecting the work that our employees are doing with the mission, vision of the organization. People want to know, how are their skills, how does the work that they're doing every day, how does that correlate with really achieving the mission of the organization? Because they don't feel their cup is not filled. They don't feel like they're utilizing the talents that they were hired to do. We're underutilizing our talent. So it's not always about compensation, which a lot of times it is. And it's not always about moving to this next level title. They're leaving because we're not connecting them back to the mission. We have all of these things that are going on in our organizations, initiatives. How does the work that they do, how is that connecting back to the overall big picture? They want to feel like they're making a difference, not just being a warm body in a position. And we also have to do, especially large organizations, we have to do a better job of making sure that the skills or the roles are still meeting the needs of the organization. I mean, I've worked in healthcare for a really long time, and I look back 20 years and I'm like, they still have that position. And we don't need that position anymore, but you have these high talented people in it that are not really fulfilling their, what they feel like they can bring. And lastly, I think we should treat our employees like entrepreneurs in the organization, because that's what sparks the creativity and really help us move and advance in our own areas. So I'll be quiet.
I'll just add to the purpose piece. So that's a really good piece of bringing up. And I was talking about the employee value proposition. I mean, it's literally the strategy you put in for your organization, and purpose is always number one. And that it's generational, but I think it's also sort of in the world. You want to know that what you're doing matters to something bigger than, the widget that you're working on. And so we're going to be a broken record here, but like the organization, each one of our 3 business units does a very good job of what is this beautiful purpose of this. And we happen to have them in GE, it's just not made up. These are really important, jet engines or, healthcare machines. But then the manager has to be the one to tie it, right? And to say, okay, we're in product management here, or we're in the law, division of how does what I do matter to that purpose? And it takes that manager to actually have that conversation and make that tie. So broken record on the manager part.
Hey, good morning, and fantastic, wonderful to be here. Danielle Squires, and I will stand up, sorry about that. Danielle Squires, and I'm at Wells Fargo in Charlotte, so we've got a lot of Charlotte folks here, and I run a division within the investment bank called Diverse Segments. In short, my team and division, all we do is execute M&A, any investment banking product, but for diverse people. So women-led companies, women-owned companies, Black, African-American, Hispanic, go down the list of diversity. So I'll just start out by saying I have a great job. We get to work. It's pretty awesome. And so what I wanted to say, though, was 2 quick comments and then a question. The first comment is I also agree on the manager piece of it. And I think from an industry overall, I speak for financial services and my company specifically, but also other firms. When we were hiring managers previously, we promoted the best trader, right, to be the manager. We promoted the best M&A savant to be the manager. And while being the best trader and the best people manager are not necessarily mutually exclusive, they often don't go together. And so we have moved from hiring people who solely run the business to hiring people who run the people. And that has actually made a major change and shift in many areas. And I see that more often. So I absolutely agree with that. The second thing I would say, it wasn't until several years ago when I became the manager of some people and then into the large division that I really believed in the global engagement survey. And you talked about that earlier, but I actually at the table just pulled up my engagement survey right as we were going through intend to stay and things like that. And I don't think enough people realize, 1, how important that information is, and 2, how firms are now looking at that. And it's not like teaching to the test, but it's now, wait a second, I need to make sure people are more engaged. And this survey is either telling me they are or they aren't. And now we have to go out and figure out why. So I can tell you companies across, at least as we call it, the street, are digging deep into that global engagement survey, and probably because we've seen people leave. And now they're like, wait a second, what are they saying to us? We need to listen. Now, conversely, my question is, we've been in unprecedented times, right, over the last couple of years. And I agree that there's a generational shift. I, too, am the Oregon Trail, you broke your yoke in the oxen, right? Like, I'm all about that. So I was there, being class of '02, but we're actually about to go through a fledgling economy that might reset this and actually create a paradigm shift again. Because tech companies are laying off. Financial services are laying off. And you actually might get picked off first, to my colleague at Goldman who says, you know what, we've got to let people go. And in this month, you came in once. Guess who's on the chopping block? Because you can't take an order. You can't take, so we actually might see the economy reset some of this if we have maybe not a soft landing, but a slightly harder landing across all of our industries, and certainly in the financial space, where people might have to say, maybe I worked differently before, but if I want a job, I can't work differently. Or if I want this job, I can't work differently. I think that's on the horizon. So my question is, do you see that on the horizon? And then two, in the financial industry, we're going to do something about it.
Well, it's definitely in the legal world, definitely there. I mean, because we had peak years the law firms made record profits in COVID for reasons I don't totally understand. But, and now this year is a complete difference. So I think, and so money talks. And so there's going to have to be a shift. And I think we're now seeing the recognition because of the change in the people moving from job to job. I think that we're seeing that they're recognizing that the flexibility of moving jobs is no longer there, which means I've got to dig in and do what I'm doing. So I definitely think that the shift in the economy and what is the future. I mean, I feel like from law firms, I don't really know exactly how bad it's going to be yet. And so but I do think that's trickling down into decision making of younger lawyers as they perceive what their opportunities are.
I think what you said is the key. If you want this job, right? I think that we saw in COVID a migration and a shift from every generation into the entrepreneurial space, right? And so we have to look at that. There are people who are working 4 or 5 jobs, particularly younger generations, because their whole goal is to stack money. Their whole desire is, I don't want to do this. I don't want to retire from anywhere. I have this dream. I have this passion. I have this desire, and I'm really good. But in order to propel that forward, I need to make this money. So the question I think that's critical is, do I want this job? I think the other piece, though, that will be interesting is boomers are going to have to start leaving the workforce in about 10 years. Health is going to require it. Age is going to require it. And there are going to be a lot of open jobs. And so the question is, even if it shifts, does the pendulum swing back because the demand for employees is now greater? Right? Well, no. The demand is so great that we have the younger folks saying again, no, you need me now, right? Which is where we ended up, where we're kind of now. You need me. So if you want me, this is what I'm demanding. And that's kind of, in my opinion, how we got here at this place we're in because of the need. So I think when you look at those two things, while I definitely think there's an opportunity for the economy to shift it back, I think we may be having this conversation again just because of the need for bodies. But the other thing when we talk back about managers is at certain points, I mean, we're all mid to high level executives. At certain points, a lot of us are going to be COOs, CHROs, right? And we know what we're looking for. We're looking for people who are willing to put in the time, who are going to work, who want to know what the employee engagement plan is, who are looking at the metrics, who are doing that. And if we're not developing the talent now, then our pool as chief leaders to pull from is going to be real short and real limited. And then they, again, are going to be in the driver's seat of, this is what I want if you want me. My track record for managing people is proven. My work product is proven. And I know that I'm in a league, of a very few people. And so I'm going to demand that if you want what I bring to the table, you have to give me certain things. So I think, yes, we may shift, but I think we'll be back here sooner than we might hope.
And I'll just add one thing. You caution you, what I heard you say is, you're not in the office, and I measure that, and therefore you get laid off. We're gonna have to. But I loved the quality of work piece. But then you have to measure: can they do their job, or somehow, give them feedback they are not able to do their job because they're not in the office, not just because they're in the office.
Hi, my name is Linda Kim. I'm currently a nurse at Duke Home Care and Hospice, but prior to the pandemic shutting us down, I ran an adult daycare in Cary, North Carolina, which is not too far from here. We served people with dementia and chronic illness that could not be independently at home. So couple of things about why do people want flexibility, and I want to talk about two things. One is this room is full of women, and our culture requires caregiving to fall most heavily on women. And up to maybe 10, 15 years ago, we talked about caregiving in terms of a young woman raising their children to a point where they would be independent, and so then therefore they can go back to putting all their energies into their careers. But now we're seeing that as soon as you're done with caregiving of the children, now you're going into the caregiving of your elderly and or chronically ill spouses or parents. And so that caregiving never ends. So why do you need that flexibility? Is because the outlets for that care are less than ideal and very unavailable. What I was going to say is, okay, so my clientele when I ran the adult daycare were mostly 80% women between 45 and 65 years of age, the time when they're going to be the most productive in their careers, where they're going to be the mentors to the next generation, where they're going to do the entrepreneurial work, where they're going to actually head and spearhead where the world goes to. They are instead struggling with caregiving and or dropping out. I would like to see, and where's my employment pool, my employee pool? They're mostly people who are not college educated, who are working on an hourly basis, and I'm competing with Amazon and Target for the same talent pool. And I can't pay them as much. And I need smarter people. I need caring people. I need people I could depend on. But they have their children and their elderly people to care for as well. So I know we're all sitting here. You're running high and very large organizations. I'm running a small organization, and we're struggling because the whole idea of care is completely ignored in our economy. And I think that needs to change. And if that changes, we're going to have women working. We're going to have lots and lots of capable women working. That's my view.
All right. And we are 5 minutes into our time, so I just want to, any final words from our panelists and just close us out, because I do know afterwards you can pull them to the side because there's a lot of activity and conversation in this room. So any final closing words that you want to share? You want one question? Okay, Gigi.
Thank you. I can actually even address what she is saying. I graduated in the mid-'70s and went on to become a CPA, was CFO of a small bank, ultimately retired, got, through the collapse of the economy, 2008, 2012, decided needed to do something different. And so I am now in the nonprofit world. And actually work for a senior services organization that has an adult daycare center, and I can absolutely attest to her, concerns about workforce. But my concern has more to do with the loss of talent of my generation that opted out early, before COVID even, and leaving, lack of mentorship. So I'm wondering from that perspective, because we've been talking more about, current generation, mid-management.
The one thing about that question as it applies to the law is interesting, because there weren't that many women in the law frankly even of that generation. There weren't very many women to look to. Even when I started practicing law, I could often be the only woman in the room, and so now I am that. So I'm now the old woman in the room. But there's now so many more of us and more women. Not my generation, but women opt out of the law for law so early and more often than other professions. So it's not the place to look to for that question.
I would also say that's where joining organizations becomes critical and pivotal for you. So my mother is a retired HR professional who is like an alum of Coupa HR, which is like the college and university HR folks. And they have a lot of those people, and they come back to the conferences, right? And they talk to you, and that's where you build those relationships. And you have to be proactive about gaining mentors. I harass my mom all the time. Hey, can you connect me with somebody who, used to be at one of these institutions, because I just want to know. So leveraging your network and really participating in professional organizations that may have people across several generations with information to provide. And you'd be surprised just how much older generations really are willing to help you if you just say, hey, I know you've been in this industry and in this space. Can we talk? And so I would say that that's been a very big help for me in getting that information and mentorship from someone from your generation who's done this, who's watched the evolution, and who can impart great wisdom.
So I'll go in for a closing, because I can see we're at that point. And I, this is a really tough topic. Like, I've loved the conversation, your comments. I mean, it is tough. It's complex. There's just so many angles. But I have to say, it takes not only smarts, but the caring to figure this out. And I just think women leaders are the ones who are going to have this right, are going to lean into it, and going to figure it out for their organizations and push their organizations to be better. So this is the go do it, ladies, right? Because I think in your organizations, you're going to be what needs to happen, and you're going to have the ideas and the influence in your organizations to make it happen. So go do it.
Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for all your wisdom, and thank you for engaging this group. And thank you guys for your time.